Psychiatrists of Reddit, has working with a depressed client ever taken a negative toll on your life? If so, how? Was going to become a psychiatrist, but after dealing with multiple teen suicide pacts that we could not seem to stop, chickened out and went with family medicine. About half of my day is spent dealing with patients' psychiatric disorders. Draining but rewarding. If it was my whole day, I would not be able to handle it. Always grateful there are docs NPs that are made of tougher stuff than me. As a clinical social worker, I have had a number of patients over the years who have been able to break through the protective barriers I had worked hard to put into place. I am a human first. Being a therapist is secondary. A few times, I have cried in front of a patient due to feeling overwhelmed by the emotions being shared or displayed. I have to work hard to make sure I do not put any of my own feelings on the other person, though, so I am quick to let people know that my tears are just me reflecting back the emotions they are putting out. Having good supervision was very important in my early career. I've been doing this for 15 years now, learning about vicarious trauma, transference and countertransference, and ways to protect myself were all key parts of learning my job beyond what any classroom or textbook could teach. I have lost sleep over my clients' patients. I spent one Christmas Eve crying alone on my front porch thinking about a client who had told me the day before about the last time he had seen his father. I have taken the long way home many times, just so I can drive in silence or listen to my music and clear my head before coming home and dealing with my own life. I started smoking cigarettes shortly after becoming a therapist, because it gave me an excuse to go outside, be alone, and clear my head after seeing people. Regarding the question of a psychotic patient and questioning my reality, no, usually when someone is psychotic, I get that pit in my stomach feeling and my barriers and boundaries are strong. I think it is much easier to get sucked into the intense emotions of sadness, anger, or grief loss than it is to start to believe someone who is expressing paranoid ideation, delusional content, or hallucinations. Not exactly what you asked, but I feel like it's in the same ballpark. As a therapist, I have spent a good deal of time working with traumatized individuals and families. We receive regular training and supervision to help deal with vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue. In this line of work, it's not hard to fall into a trap of letting your empathy for the client overwhelm you and have negative impact on your personal life outside of work. My mother was an RN and became very good at emotional detachment. I learned this the time I cut the palm of my hand pretty badly climbing a tree. I was 10 and had to walk about 10 minutes home to get it fixed up. It wasn't really that bad, although I do still have a scar, but it was bleeding a lot. I knew from experience that my mom would be pissed if I got blood on my clothes, so I walked home holding my hand up, which only resulted in covering my entire arm in blood. When I walked into the house, I said, "Mom," and she gasped. Then suddenly her face changed, and she became an entirely different personality. She was polite but firm, and not at all interested in what happened. She took me to the bathroom, washed off all the blood, cleaned and bandaged the wound, and then washed up and put away all the supplies. Then she turned back into my mom and cried. Later, she became a school nurse, and that did eventually get to her. Finally, she had to retire early because of the sad things she saw but could not change. Well, when I posted this, I was thinking primarily about counselors becoming depressed from listening to sadness all day. I never thought about their families and this kind of game face that I suppose they have to have when dealing with people. Hey, not sure if this has been said already, but it ought to be, so here goes. This applies to all you folks who think you're depressed or know that you are. Please go talk to a psychiatrist. Don't let these stories make you feel like you'd be burdening anyone. They're there to do a job, and the vast majority of the time they really do want to help. Don't be put off by thinking you're just a nuisance. If you need help, then get it. Currently working on master's degree in marriage and family therapy and interning as a therapist. I have worked with clients with schizophrenia, early onset dementia, suicidal teens, couples on the verge of divorce, severely depressed individuals, and substance users. It is a very taxing job. You have a session with a depressed teen, and then 10 minutes later you have a session with a bickering couple, and then you have one with a man who talks to himself more than he talks to you. And then a man who has dementia and can't remember that we've had the same conversation 4 times now. To say that you're not affected would be a lie. At the end of the day you're emotionally drained. And then you have to go home to your own life and emotions, and sometimes you have nothing left to give. In particular, the man that I see with early onset dementia is the one who has affected me the most. He tells me that he wants a full-time job, but sometimes he forgets how to drive or where he is. He has a hard time accepting what is happening to him, and I have a hard time making him face the truth. Making him understand that his life will never be the same, and that it only gets worse from here. His wife and him are low income and he is progressing faster into dementia each day. The state refuses to give him any disability. TLDR. Yes, it's freaking hard. I had a therapist who was the most compassionate woman I've ever met. I loved her so much. She clearly cared for all of her clients. It was sliding scale therapy, so eventually she moved on to bigger and better things, which she discovered. But I knew she cared about me and all her clients more than I've seen any other therapist care for. I have no idea if it took its toll, but she never let it show. She was just a sweet, helpful woman. If you're reading this, Laura, thank you. You brought me out of 22 years of depression and I'm still going strong. Thank you for being a therapist everyone deserves. I work in NeuroIQ and had a 22-year PT who attempted suicide. He shot himself. He had placed the gun, pistol .357, if I recall correctly, under his chin. The angle was such that he blew the bottom half of his face apart and the shockwave fractured the underside of his cranium. His brain was left unaffected but his head as a whole was well traumatized. He was totally neurologically intact and remembered everything. He had had a pretty hard life in his short 22 years, drug addicted, abusive parents, homelessness, multiple assaults, friends dying left and right due to drug overdoses, etc. His main concern was that we, the staff, would just lump him in with the rest of the crazies and he would get written off as a psychiatric lost cause, due to the nature of his injuries. He was unable to speak for the time being and this was all communicated to me in writing. I assured him that we, the staff, we are absolutely interested in working with him to improve his situation and that because he was so badly physically injured, he would be with us for a while and that he should take every opportunity to find some psychological and emotional center. He cried and I held him and he was finally able to get a full night's sleep for the first time in 2 weeks. By the time my next shift came around, he had been transferred to another department. I cried when I got home that day. I don't think it fricked me up, but I will always remember him and I hope he is doing at least okay. I can imagine even people you don't really know all too well can have such a major impact on your life just from human compassion and sharing of emotions, such as him crying as you held him. My therapist told me it's stressful to listen to me talk about my life. Not sad, but probably more than his typical clients. I felt bad, but figured my checkbook helped with all the hassle. My therapist said this to me as well, that it's stressful and hard to listen to me talk, but that was because he was validating the fact that my life sounds stressful, and it's not all in my head, just an alternate perspective. A high suicide rate among psychiatrists, 58 to 65/100, 000 compared with that of the general population, 11/100, 000, is the toll that it takes on this professional group. I am not suggesting that working with depressed psychotic clients is the only factor involved. You need to remember one magic word as it comes to interaction with your patients: empathy only. Anything over and above is a recipe for trouble. Psychiatrist here, almost retired from practice, 55 plus years old. Yes, we worry about you a lot. We have training in school to help us recognize this, recognize our own reactions, and try to limit this while still being empathic. It is hard. I could give you several stories of people I was scared to let out of my office, scared of what they might do. But here's the thing. We are not in control. They are. We try like heck to offer any help we can. Sometimes it's not enough. How does this affect me? Sometimes at night and distracted because of concern about someone. Sometimes I cry because of things that happened. And then I have to answer my children saying, "Who hurt you, mama?" I explain that I try to help sick people and sometimes it helps. Sometimes it does not. But you know what is worse than all of that? When people see my non-reactive face and accuse me of not caring, of doing the job for money. They have no idea how wrong they are. There are 1,000 jobs I could do that would not be this emotionally demanding. I do this because I've been there. I've hurt like they hurt. I've had family struggles that have almost killed me. But I can't tell them that. Why? Because it's not about me. It's about them and their experience. It's selfish and inappropriate to say I felt like that too. So just because I don't react like your friends doesn't mean I don't care. Currently in grad school for counseling and work at a treatment center for teenage girls who don't want to be there. Of course it occurs. The quote I heard from one of the counselors on staff was, "When the girls are good, I'm good." Imagine being around your best, most positive, most interesting group of friends and what that does for your mental state. Now, imagine being around people, though they don't want to be this way, who are depressed, unstable, highly reactive. It's draining. You gotta put up strong boundaries between yourself and the other person, and watch for counter-transference, where you take on feelings and situational aspects of the client. I've found that I need rituals, like washing my face or taking a walk or having a beer not at home, before I return home to really separate work-home life. I'd imagine it must be hard to try and help people but have to enforce boundaries that mean you can't show any emotion to them. Especially for the people that are undergoing therapy, it must seem like psychiatrists don't really care, when really you're just trying to protect your own sanity. I'm a psychiatrist with a long history of depression myself. Honestly, I do go home and worry about my patients a bit, but by and large, my work is uplifting and hopeful. Definitely never questioned reality because of a psychotic person, though. Not myself, but my mom. She's a clinical psychologist and helps people with traumatic pasts. In the beginning she was not used the sheer level of emotional transference she had to cope with. She would receive a lot of raw anger and pain from people who were not used to talking about their past. It took a toll at first. Now she's a pro. My mother is a clinical psychologist. Yes, her patients' well-being seeps into her life. She can't share details with me or anyone, but she does tell me sometimes in general terms why she is so sad or preoccupied. About a decade ago, one of her patients committed suicide and I can tell you that she still thinks about it frequently. She told me that a couple recently decided to divorce during a counseling session. She goes over and over these situations again and again to questions whether she did everything she could. It's ironic. I think the empathy that leads many people into this field is one of the things that is most difficult to deal with once they get a degree and start practicing. One thing I will add, since you talked about psychotic patients and reality, my mother has become hyper concerned about my teenage daughter and son. It's not because she's a typical helicopter grandma, but because she sees people in her practice who she knows go right back out to the street. It's made her paranoid. Thank you for sharing this. It's important for all of us to remember that even professional experienced helpers suffer on behalf of those they help. It's something we are taught to handle and build defenses against this kind of thing. But anyone who says they aren't affected by the worst stories is lying. I was seeing a therapist once a week last year. I was depressed and on our last visit I remember talking to him about the thoughts I was having. I basically was telling him about my thoughts on suicide and it was a pretty deep conversation. He asked if I wanted to schedule for next week. I told him I'd call the office because I wasn't sure of my schedule. Called a time after that and was told he passed away. No details. I googled it and his obituary stated he died the day after I saw him last. Couldn't find any info on cause of death. He was early 50s, seemed to be in great health. I don't really want to know the details because if he did take his own life, I would feel horrible. I know there are a myriad of other causes of death, but a sinking feeling I have makes me think suicide. Haven't seen a shrink since. Took me forever to even go to him and after 8 sessions I really open up and can't see myself doing that all over again. I'm really sorry to hear that, but know that it's not your fault at all. Even if he did commit suicide, it won't have been because of your conversations with him. It will purely have been down to his inner demons eventually getting to him. I really recommend seeing someone else for your own sake. I know it will be really difficult, but it could definitely help. Shrink here. When a patient commits suicide, that tends to bum me out. You think over and over the last time you saw them, What did I miss? There's a sense of intimacy that you have with a patient, and there is no comparison. You're not friends, as there's this huge imbalance of power tipped towards your end. You have more of a paternal role, and it really is crushing to lose someone that was your responsibility, that you fricked up. You're never the same after the first one, and for a while it adds a sense of panic to every subsequent PT. Is she the next one is what you think over and over, and the reality is too. You wonder if you're going to get sued. I practice in the US. I could still be sued for up to 18 years after the fact is my understanding. That's frightening in a very real but different way. Of course there are terminal cases in all of medicine, and psychiatry is no different. Some people will kill themselves no matter the intervention, and you have to try to remember that. You need to be on your toes at all times, but to be a good shrink that fear cannot consume you. It's a tough balance to maintain, and you must be ready to force a person into the hospital against their will, which can be an enormously difficult thing to do. This has also led to me being sued, but thankfully it was unsuccessful, but still took a while to resolve. Psychotic patients have never made me question reality, which honestly sounds like the premise for a sequel to the horrendous I Am Sam. But they do make you question why you live your life a certain way. They are all about primary processes and as such are a bit like children at times. When you try to force them to do normal things we do in society, they'll push back and ask why. If you mentalize WTH them, you'll see that a lot of the things we do are based on convention and are a bit silly. I've been depressed for over a decade and have attempted to kill myself nearly 4 times under my psychiatric care. I just feel sorry for my doctors and psychs. They don't really know how to help me anymore and have admitted this themselves. Still, I'm really grateful they put up with my crap, and grateful to other psychs and doctors that are always supportive of their patients. Obligatory: I am not a psychiatrist, but I am getting my master's in counseling and have had several semesters experience working directly with clients. To be honest, I feel like I am still learning how to not take work home with me. Sometimes I can't help but go over and over in my mind what people talked about, and in that way it does take a toll on my personal time. I have talked to other clinicians about this and most say that this gets easier over time and with more experience. Not a psychiatrist, but I'm a social worker. There are very few clients I have that have taken a toll on me because of their depression, anxiety, psychosis, or other MH issues. But that's why I go to therapy myself to help me process these feels to avoid countertransference. There was one particular client, homeless client with severe and persistent mental illness. I think he had schizophrenia and drug use but was high functional. That took such a toll on me that I broke professional boundaries and basically flipped out on him. I won't say why due to confidentiality. I shortly quit my job thereafter and moved to a position that aligned closer to what I wanted to do, working with children and families. I would be doing my clients a disservice if I was not happy in my job. That's why I quit. Seriously, everyone should go to therapy. Just to be clear, because it seems like there is a fair amount of confusion here. A psychiatrist is a medical doctor who has gone to medical school, 7 years of college, and then undergone further specialized training in this field, i.e. mental health. A psychologist is someone with a postgraduate psychology degree and is certified as a psychologist. A therapist can be either. And a neurologist is also a medical doctor that has undergone specialized training after medical school and deals with physical abnormalities of the brain. Although it does seem, as new research is pointing out, that mental illness is in some cases associated with physical differences in the brain. Psychiatrist here. The answer to Up's question is, of course. But what's remarkable to me is how often patients make my life better, without necessarily intending to. Many of them are intelligent, talented, interesting people, who have experienced worse things than I ever have, or hopefully will, and many of them have dealt with life stresses more gracefully than I would have. I've learned a lot from them, so much, in fact, that I regularly wonder to myself how all of you who are not psychiatrists manage to do it. How did you figure out life without having access to this kind of information? Not a doctor, but I've been struggling with my own mental health a lot recently and could really use someone to talk to today. This thread being on my front page kinda makes me feel like I should make a post and see what happens. Part of our ethical responsibility as mental health professionals to our clients is remaining hopeful for them. You have to straddle a line with one foot in their world and one foot in ours so you can empathize, but you also cannot fully join them in their darkness. It can be a tricky balance. I work as residential support for severely symptomatic borderline personality disorder. A key behavior of those with BPD is explosive fits of emotional expression. When I first got hired, I would feel like I failed if someone yelled at me, or like I didn't meet their needs, so they escalated. Finally, my supervisor point blank said, "Look, this is a job where you just have to get used to being yelled at." Now I approach it as an opportunity to set boundaries and model that behavior. So if someone is yelling at me, I tell them that I would like to help, but in order for me to do that, they are going to have to take a couple deep breaths and express their needs in a way I can understand instead of personally attacking me. Sometimes that initially makes it worse, but generally the person comes around and asks politely. In a way, it has helped me navigate difficult people in my personal life. I definitely have had close encounters with compassion fatigue. One of my clients committed suicide and I was devastated. I didn't want to quit, but I didn't really want to be at work either. I was pretty checked out for a couple weeks afterward and cried a lot. I try to remember that my role is to support people in their recovery from BPD and stay in that mode. It's not my job to save people. In fact, that is impossible. But it is hard sometimes. As for psychotic people making me doubt reality, I constantly have a lingering doubt in my brain that wonder if the CIA is actually employing all these people and then dumping them to be considered insane by society. Because the delusions are all super similar, or at least the spy military sire ones. I find it strange that it is such a common delusion. I know that's not true and that there is probably a good clinical reason that my residential support worker brain isn't educated in. But dang, that would be some conspiracy. I was a therapist at an outpatient program for people living with severe mental illness, MDD, BP1, schizophrenia, etc. During one session, the client and I were reviewing the work we had done together as I was working on closure and termination of treatment. I realized that we had spent exactly 1 year together. Every week, sitting in my office for an hour on Wednesdays, we talked about her life, problems, perceptions, etc. I had this moment where I realized how much time I had spent with someone that I would otherwise never spend a minute with. It's hard to word, but I kinda felt like, WTF am I doing my life? On psychotic patients, people who experience audio hallucinations, visual hallucinations, delusions. They never make me question reality per se, but I have witnesses some who exhibit strange moments of incredible insights that border on especially. One time I was working at a crisis center. I had a fight my long distance GF the night before. I hadn't told anyone. I was walking to the back office to get something and I had to cross the smoking porch. This client was out there talking gibberish to herself as usual. While I was walking, I was thinking about the fight and I started feeling really bad about what I had said to my GF. The lady looks straight at me and says, "You feel bad because you were mean to her," and then she goes back to talking gibberish. It was psychologist here. Psychologists are usually people who have a great capacity for empathy but also a large tolerance for experiencing pain. For the most part, you are going to feel very deeply for the depressed person sitting in front of you. When the depression they are experiencing starts affecting you, then 1. You have to be self-aware enough to understand that the feelings you are experiencing are a mix of your own experiences and the experience of the patient. 2. Understand that digesting and interpreting those feelings are important for the treatment of your patient. However, there are times when a patient's experience hits a nerve and may trigger anxiety, depression, anger, or whatever unprocessed emotions you have within yourself. This is tricky territory because it can get in the way of helping your patients. The most troubled I've ever been after working with a client was because of this type of situation. The client's relationship with her family reminded me so much of my own relationship with my mother that I often came out of my sessions with her feeling very anxious to the point of not really feeling focused in my work for the rest of the day. Eventually, through enough processing with my supervisor, I was able to understand what was bringing this up in me and how it played out in treatment as well. But it's never fun to dread seeing a patient. As for psychotic points making you question reality, For me this happens quite often. I feel like it has to do with really wanting to believe your client. Also, you can't really argue with a delusional person. You don't say you believe them, but you can't just disagree either. It's an interesting reality to experience and makes me marvel every day at how fragile the human mind really is. As for how that's affected me, I do find myself very sensitive to seeing things out of the corner of my eye, as there's always that small fear in the back of my mind. Therapist here. As others have said, it definitely can take its toll. We're taught to keep one foot in our world and one foot in the client's so that we can remain grounded while also being empathetic. Empathy is one of the biggest parts of our job and requires us to put ourselves in the client's shoes to really understand what they're feeling. It can certainly be tough at times. I've gotten better at becoming a bit more emotionally detached. It's sad, but we have to get by. I talk to colleagues if anything is getting to me with clients. I have regular supervisor that I talk to about my cases as well. Sometimes though it will still get to you. I recently had a 2-hour crisis session with a suicidal client. I maintained my composure throughout, but as soon as it was over I just crashed. I felt emotionally and physically drained. Took me about an hour to get back to feeling normal. Luckily that isn't an everyday experience. Most of the time it's not too bad and I really enjoy what I do. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.